The first person ever to see the North Pole was the Norwegian Roald Amundsen, who flew over the North Pole aboard the Norge Zeppelin on 12 May 1926. Some years before, Amundsen himself had had a hard race with Robert Scott in the quest to reach the South Pole. According to our reckoning, we had reached our destination, all of us gathered around the colors, a beautiful silk flag, all hands taking hold of it and planting it. Nevertheless, Scott was not as lucky as the Norwegian explorer. He arrived 30 days later and died on the trip back. Friday, 29th March. Outside the door of the tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott. For God's sake, look after our people. Almost a century after that, science and technology have helped man to better understand these harsh but fascinating territories, whose conservation and equilibrium, threatened for several decades, is essential to the balance of the whole Earth.
Arctic is a very beautiful area. It consists of 8 countries that has a coastline towards the Arctic. It's the USA, it's Canada, Greenland, and then Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, who doesn't have a coast, and Finland, and Russia.
The anomalies we have in the Arctic are the sea ice blanket on an ocean. That's the only place in the world where you have it.
You have the midnight sun for several months in the high Arctic. As a consequence of that, you have a lot of darkness during the wintertime, and you have complete darkness in some of the areas in the high north.
Times where it's completely dark, you do not see the sun. Sun just came back. So you have extremes between sunlight and no sunlight, dark time and light time, temperature extremes, light extremes. And this makes the Arctic quite unique.
The Antarctic is also a region even more extreme than the Arctic, and it still has many hidden mysteries. The Antarctic is where the lowest temperature on the planet has ever been recorded, minus 98 degrees Celsius.
The Antarctica is a continent which is surrounded by ocean, which is unlike the Arctic, which is an ocean surrounded by land areas. It's quite high, so you have elevations around 5,000 meters. And in the interior of the Antarctica, the temperatures are very low. At the South Pole Station, for example, the annual average temperature is minus 50 C. While in the Arctic, you have more modest climate. And it's totally glaciated. In the Arctic, you have a thin film of ice, which is sea ice, while in the south you have this 2,000 meters thick ice. So that's a big difference between the Antarctic and the Arctic.
These beautiful polar regions are extremely sensitive to an unstoppable menace developing in recent years: climate change. Global warming threatens the whole planet, but it's in the poles, particularly in the Arctic, where its advance is fastest.
The Arctic region is undergoing climate change as the rest of the world. In the Arctic, you can see some of the changes in a more drastic way. The ice disappears, and when that white ice disappears, you get the dark ocean visible.
The polar regions are affected the most on the globe. They are changing the fastest, and also projections from climate models goes in that direction, that we must expect polar regions to continue to be the fastest changing areas of the world.
Now the situation is becoming dramatic. Every passing year, its impact grows more and more serious. And what is even worse, faster.
Since we know the ice cover exactly through the satellites from 1979 and onwards, we lose about 5 to 10% of the ice cover every decade, every 10th year. That is the ice cover. That's what you can see from outside, from space. But then there's also something called ice thickness, and we have lost 70% of the ice volume, the thickness, in the Arctic Ocean.
The first consequences of the melting of the poles have already been observed in those regions. Endangered species must migrate farther and farther in search of food. Populations have seen how their lifestyles have been affected. For instance, the disappearance of the permafrost. Frozen soil will undoubtedly affect their infrastructures.
Certainly a very important question. How is the melting of permafrost influencing the infrastructure? The streets, transport, towns, cities, villages. Streets will disappear, airports. So how do you do then communication between the small villages or cities in those areas? How the governments will react to such dramatic changes in permafrost regions.
But they will not be the only ones affected by the impact of thawing. Although we may think those regions are very remote, the consequences of climate change in polar regions are already being felt throughout the planet.
The Arctic climate system is connected to the rest of the world via two main pathways. It's the atmospheric transport, which brings a lot of warm and moist air into the Arctic, and the other way is through the ocean currents, which also brings a lot of heat into the Arctic system.
There is also another air current linked to the Arctic climate that flows west to east, the jet stream. It is closely connected to the climate of the regions it passes through. Due to the smaller temperature difference between the Arctic and the equator, this current, which flowed in a zone pattern before, following the parallels from west to east, has now weakened, and it circulates, creating paths with meandering shapes, north to south and south to north. When a region is in the descending part of the current, it suffers cold waves, while regions in the ascendant part receive hot African air, and therefore heat waves. The alterations in the jet stream are causing the seasons to disappear in the middle latitudes, as it goes from one extreme to the other. In addition, in the last few years, very considerable abnormalities in temperature have been observed, whether very low or very high. In fact, on 5th July 2018, northern Siberia was hit by an extremely intense heat wave that made thermometers rise 25 degrees Celsius above normal on those summer days to a record-breaking temperature of 33 degrees Celsius along the coast of the Arctic Ocean. That heat wave spread all over the northern latitudes, from Canada through Greenland, Scandinavian countries and Russia, making the temperatures rise to extreme record highs. The worldwide consequences may be catastrophic and unpredictable. Extreme weather events will arise, and they will be more and more intense. But it is not only about more frequent and violent extreme weather events. There are other consequences resulting from thawing that can be already observed. Melting causes a rise in the sea level, threatening coastal areas around the world. The rise in the acidification of the ocean will threaten fishing. Ocean currents are affected, which could radically change the climate in some parts of the world. Melting will cause the release of methane, which could seriously accelerate climate change. The balance of the polar climate as we know it is becoming seriously threatened.